The day she called me crying from a police station parking lot in Phoenix, I was sitting on my back porch in Oaxaca, watching the sun go down over the mountains, drinking coffee I'd paid 60 cents for at the market 2 blocks away. I did not feel satisfied. I did not feel vindicated. I mostly just felt tired and a little sad and grateful for the coffee. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, or at least to the part of the beginning that matters. My name is not important. My family calls me Uncle Frederick, my daughter called me Dad. My ex-wife called me a lot of things over the years, but the one she used most in our last 12 months together was obstacle. I didn't know that's what she thought of me until much later. That's the thing about living inside a marriage. You only see your own view from the inside. The truth is usually somewhere on the outside looking in. I was 61 years old when she filed. I had worked for 33 years as a civil engineer for the same firm in Columbus, Ohio. I had a 401k I was proud of, a house in Clintonville we bought in 2001, a workshop in the garage where I built furniture on weekends, and a marriage I genuinely believed was stable. Not passionate. We were past passion by our early 50s, but stable, solid, two people who had agreed, without ever saying it out loud, to finish the road together. Her name was Vivian. She was 57. She taught elementary school music for 22 years, then quit when her mother got sick, then never went back. She was funny when she wanted to be, and cold when she didn't, and for the last 4 or 5 years of our marriage, she mostly didn't want to be funny anymore. I noticed the distance. I thought it was grief. Her mother had passed in 2019, and Vivian had taken it hard. I gave her space. I picked up extra responsibilities around the house. I suggested counseling twice. She said we didn't need it, that she just needed time. I gave her time. I kept giving her time until the morning she put a folder of papers on the kitchen table and said, "I want a divorce. I've already spoken to an attorney." I sat there with my coffee getting cold and I said, "Okay." Not because I didn't care, because I was so completely blindsided that my brain hadn't caught up yet. I sat there for probably 2 minutes after she walked out of the room before I realized I was still holding the mug. What followed was 8 months of the most painful administrative process I have ever experienced. We split the house proceeds, or so I thought. We divided the retirement accounts, or so I thought. The decree was finalized in March. She kept the car she wanted. I kept mine. We had no minor children. Our daughter Reese was 34 and lived in Scottsdale. Our son-in-law worked in commercial real estate. I want to pause here and talk about Reese, because she is important to this story in a way I did not fully understand until much later. Reese had always been closer to her mother. That is not a criticism. It is just the truth. Mothers and daughters have a gravity between them that fathers sometimes spend their whole lives orbiting from a distance. I accepted that. I loved my daughter fiercely, and I believed she loved me. We talked on the phone every 2 or 3 weeks. She came to Columbus for Christmas. I thought we were fine. When the divorce happened, Reese was sympathetic but measured. She told me she loved us both and wasn't going to take sides. I respected that. I told her I understood. What I did not know, could not have known yet, was that there were things she already knew that she had chosen not to tell me. I put the Columbus house on the market in April, took my share of the equity, about $94,000 after fees, and started making a plan. I was 61. I was not ready to retire completely, but I was done with Ohio winters and office politics and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from sleeping in a house where your marriage used to live. A colleague of mine had spent 6 months in Oaxaca, Mexico, the year before and wouldn't stop talking about it. The cost of living, he said, was a third of what we paid in the Midwest. The food was extraordinary. The people were warm. The pace was human. I did my research. I visited in June for 3 weeks. I rented an apartment near the Llano Park for $490 a month. I walked everywhere. My total monthly expenses, rent, food, utilities, transportation, health insurance through an expat plan, came to about $1,800. On my pension and a modest withdrawal from my 401k, I could live comfortably and still let the rest of my retirement savings grow. In August, I moved to Oaxaca. I told Reese. She said, "Dad, that's really far." I said I knew. She said she hoped I'd be happy. I said I hoped so too. We left it at that. The first 3 months were an adjustment. My Spanish was functional but not fluent. I'd taken 2 years of it in college 40 years ago, and it came back slowly like a muscle that had been asleep. My neighbor across the courtyard, a retired school teacher named Consuelo, had infinite patience with my attempts and corrected me gently and without embarrassment. I started taking a language class on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I found a Protestant church with an English-speaking service on Sundays where I met a small community of other American expats, mostly retirees, a few remote workers, one widower from Detroit named Alton who became my closest friend there. I was not happy exactly. Not yet, but I was rebuilding something, and for the first time in years I felt like what I was building was actually mine. I had been in Oaxaca for about 4 months when Alton forwarded me something. He'd seen it on Facebook. He knows a few people who knew people from my old life in Columbus. It was an engagement announcement. Vivian and a man named Preston. The announcement had a photo, Vivian in a white dress, laughing, her head thrown back, a man with a silver watch on his wrist and the kind of smile that knows how expensive it is. The announcement mentioned that they had been together for some time. I set down my phone and looked at the wall for a while. For some time. She had filed out divorce in July of the previous year. We had been married for 31 years. I did the math and I did not enjoy the results. I want to be careful here, because I am not a vindictive person by nature, and I genuinely tried not to let that discovery harden me. What I felt was not rage exactly. It was something older and quieter than rage. It was the specific grief of realizing that the story you thought you were living was not the story that was actually happening. That the years you believed were shared were, at some point, something she was enduring alone, or enduring with someone else. I prayed about it. That is not a metaphor. I actually got on my knees in my apartment in Oaxaca and asked God to take the bitterness out of me before it took root. I don't know if that sounds dramatic. It was necessary. I called Reese that weekend. I didn't bring up Preston. I just wanted to hear her voice. She was warm, a little distracted. She mentioned she was helping her mother plan something and then caught herself and moved on quickly. I noticed the catch. I didn't comment on it. 2 weeks later, Alton forwarded me the wedding invitation that had apparently circulated on Facebook. Vivian and Preston. A venue called the Greystone in Scottsdale. A date in February. Scottsdale, where Reese lived. I called Reese the next day and asked her directly. There was a long pause on the line. Then she said yes, she knew about the wedding. Yes, she was going. And then, quietly, she told me that her husband, my son-in-law, Derek, had agreed to walk Vivian down the aisle since Vivian's brother was in poor health and couldn't travel. I said, I see. She said, Dad, I hope you understand. She's my mother. I said, I know she is. And then I said goodbye and sat with that for a long time. The thing that hurt was not the wedding. People remarry. People move on. The thing that hurt was the geography of it. My daughter's city, my daughter's husband, my daughter's life now woven around this new man who had been woven into my wife's life while she was still, on paper, my wife. That was the part I couldn't quite process. I kept turning it over, trying to find the angle where it made sense. I didn't go to the wedding. I had not been invited, obviously, and I had no desire to appear. But I will tell you that I thought about it on that Saturday in February. I was at a food stall near the market, eating a bowl of tazajo and black beans, and I thought, they're doing it right now. And then I ate my lunch and went home. What I did not know, what none of them seemed to know yet, was that Preston had a history. I didn't go looking for it. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of man who investigates his ex-wife's new husband. That is not my character, and it was not my business. What happened was this. Alton, who had worked in commercial banking for 30 years before he retired, saw something in the engagement announcement that I had not. The company, Preston, was listed as CEO of some kind of investment advisory group headquartered in Scottsdale, had a name Alton recognized. Not because it was famous, but because a version of it had appeared in a civil complaint filed in Nevada 3 years earlier. A different company name, same pattern, same type of operation. Alton sent me a link to a Nevada state court document. I read it. Then I called my former colleague back in Columbus who has a background in financial compliance, and he read it too. The pattern was not ambiguous. A man who moved money, moved names, moved states, and left creditors behind. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I thought about what my responsibility was. I thought about the fact that Vivian and I had ended badly and that anything I said would look like sour grapes. I thought about Reese, who was in the same city as this man, whose husband had just walked his new mother-in-law down the aisle. In the end, I wrote one email. I sent it to Reese. I did not editorialize. I attached the court document, the link to the Nevada complaint, and a short note from my colleague explaining what the pattern meant in plain language. I wrote, "I am not asking you to do anything with this. I thought you should have it. I love you." I sent it on a Tuesday morning from the cafe where I do most of my reading. She did not respond for 11 days. During those 11 days, I continued my life. I went to Spanish class. I walked to the market. I had dinner with Alton on Friday evenings. I went to church on Sundays. I did not check my email compulsively, which is a discipline I have worked hard to develop and which Wawaka has made considerably easier. The city has a way of making urgency feel optional. On the 12th day, Reese called. She did not say hello. She said, "Dad, how did you know?" I told her I hadn't known, that Alton had seen something, that I'd looked into it, that I'd felt she deserved to have the information. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me what had happened at the wedding. There had been a woman there, a guest on Preston's side. A woman in her late 50s, silver hair, came alone, sat in the back. Nobody seemed to know her well. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, this woman had approached one of Preston's business associates and asked, quietly but not quietly enough, whether Preston had ever resolved the situation with the Delray Beach investors. She had apparently said it the way you say something you assume is common knowledge. The associate had gone pale. Someone else had overheard. Word moved through the reception the way word does at small gatherings, quickly and without mercy. By the time the toast started, Vivian had heard enough fragments to ask Preston directly what the woman had meant. He had said it was nothing. A misunderstanding, old business. She had looked at his face while he said it. She had read his face the way a woman reads a face she is now legally bound to. She had excused herself to the restroom and not come back for 20 minutes. My daughter told me this in a voice that was very steady, which told me she had been practicing steadiness for at least several days. She said her mother had called her the morning after the wedding and cried for 45 minutes. She said Vivian had hired a forensic accountant the following week. She said the forensic accountant had found things. I did not ask what things. That was no longer my business if it ever was. Reese said, "Mom asked me if you knew anything about this before the wedding." I told her the truth. I had found out and sent the information when I did, as quickly as I reasonably could. She was quiet again. Then she said, "She's not going to call you, Dad." I said that was all right. Then Reese said, "I'm going to call you. More. Is that okay?" I said that was more than okay. The call I mentioned at the beginning, Vivian calling me from the police station parking lot, came about 6 weeks after that conversation with Reese. It was not a call asking for help. It was not a call asking for anything. I think it was a call she needed to make because I was the only person on earth who would understand, without explanation, what it felt like to have trusted the wrong person for a very long time. She was not crying when I answered. She'd already done that. She sounded like a person who had been wrung out and left to dry, empty, exhausted, and oddly calm in the way that comes after a certain threshold of shock. She said, "He was already being investigated by the SEC when we got married." She said it the way you say something you are still trying to make real by saying it out loud. I said, "I'm sorry, Vivian." And I was. Whatever she had done, whatever had happened between us, she did not deserve that. Nobody deserves to begin a new chapter and find out the chapter was a trap. She said, I lost the money from the house sale, the joint account I opened with him. I did the math silently and didn't say anything. Almost 60,000, she said. He moved it 2 weeks after the wedding. I said I was sorry again. She asked how I was doing. I told her I was fine, that I was in Oaxaca, that the coffee was 60 cents at the market up the street. She laughed, a short broken sound, but a laugh. She said, of course you are. Not bitterly, more like she was recognizing something she should have expected. We talked for 11 minutes. At the end, she said, take care of yourself, okay? I said I would. She hung up. I sat there on my porch and watched the light change on the mountains for a long time. I thought about 31 years. I thought about the house in Clintonville, the workshop in the garage, the furniture I had made with my own hands that I had left behind because I couldn't take it with me. I thought about Reese as a little girl, dancing in the living room to music only she could hear. I thought about how much of life is just people trying to get away from something, pain, boredom, the version of themselves they got tired of, and how the running rarely solves the thing they were running from. I am not wise. I want to be honest about that. I have made my own mistakes, some of which I will carry for the rest of my life, but I have learned, slowly, the way I learn most things, that justice and revenge are not the same thing, and that waiting for someone to suffer does nothing for the condition of your own soul. I did not want Vivian to suffer. I wanted to stop suffering myself. Those are different goals, and they require different choices. The choice I made was Oaxaca. 60-cent coffee and Tuesday Spanish class and Friday dinners with Alton and a church where I sing off-key with people who don't know what my life used to look like. It is a quiet life. Some mornings it still feels like exile. Most mornings now it feels like arrival. Reese flew down in April, her first time in Mexico. She stayed for 9 days. We walked the markets together, ate at a different restaurant every night, sat on my back porch in the evenings while the light did that thing it does in Oaxaca, that gold and violet thing that doesn't look real, and she told me things about the past few years that she had been carrying alone. I told her things too. We were honest with each other in a way we had not been in a long time, maybe ever. On our last night, she said, I should have told you. When I found out about Preston, when I first started to suspect something wasn't right, I should have come to you. I said, you're here now. She put her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was 6 years old, sitting beside me on the couch while I watched the news. I put my arm around her. The mountains were going gold at the edges and the coffee was almost gone and the evening was very quiet, and I thought, this is the thing that was always true. Everything else, the marriage, the betrayal, the house in Ohio, the man with the silver watch, all of it was weather. What you have when the weather clears is what you actually have. I have my daughter. I have my faith. I have a porch in Oaxaca and a neighbor who corrects my Spanish and a friend who sends me court documents when I need them, and 60-cent coffee and the particular peace that comes from having no illusions left to protect. It is enough. Some days it is more than enough. I did not come here looking for that. But I found it anyway, and I am not giving it back. I think about that phone call sometimes. Vivian in the parking lot, her voice scraped clean of everything except exhaustion. And what stays with me is not the satisfaction some people might expect me to feel. What stays with me is how long the consequences of a single choice can travel before they finally arrive. She made her choices. Preston made his. And the distance between who those choices promised to make them and who those choices actually made them, that distance is what called me from a police station parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in Oaxaca. I am not a man who believes the universe keeps a ledger. But I do believe that character compounds, the same way interest compounds. Every decision you make either builds the person we're becoming or quietly dismantles them. Preston had spent years dismantling himself, a little at a time, in states when nobody knew his last name yet. That woman at the wedding, the one with silver hair who asked one honest question to the wrong person, she didn't bring him down. He had built the structure of his own collapse long before she opened her mouth. She just walked into the room at the right moment. What I had to learn, Slowly, the way I learn everything that actually matters was the difference between being good and being clever about being good. I spent the first part of my marriage believing that showing up, being steady, not causing problems was enough. It is necessary. It is not sufficient. Alton saw something in a press release that I had walked right past because I had stopped paying attention. I had confused loyalty with obedience and presence with awareness. That is not a small confusion. It cost me years I cannot get back, and it nearly cost Reese something I don't want to name. What I have now. The porch, the coffee, the Tuesday Spanish class, Reese's head on my shoulder with the mountains going gold. None of it arrived because I was passive. It arrived because at 61 years old I finally chose, consciously, to stop organizing my life around what other people needed me to be and start building something true. That took more courage than I expected. It is a quieter courage than the kind people write songs about. It is the courage of getting on a plane with 2 suitcases and no guarantee, of learning a language badly in front of strangers who are kind about it, of sending one honest email to your daughter and then waiting 12 days without knowing what she'll do with it. The 3 things I know now that I did not know at 30. Who you are when nobody is watching is the only version of you that is actually real. The mind you keep sharp, curious, skeptical, willing to look at a court document and understand what it means, is a form of protection no insurance policy can replace. And the will to start over, to rebuild in a new place from honest materials, is not something that gets easier with age. You have to choose it anyway, every morning. With the 60-cent coffee and the imperfect Spanish and the quiet that used to feel like exile and now, most days, feels like exactly enough. Reese comes back in September. She's bringing her husband. He called me last week to apologize. Not for going to the wedding, but for the way he'd looked at me in the months before I left, like I was a problem that had been solved. I told him I understood. I meant it. People read the room they're standing in. The room they were standing in had been arranged to make me look small. That's not entirely their fault. Some of it is mine, for standing there so long without saying anything. I'm not small, I never was. It just took Walaka to remind me.